A young girl walked into the Iron Skulls clubhouse, her eyes red from crying, and whispered, "My brother's still in the basement." The bikers didn't understand the gravity of her words until she revealed who had put him there, and the air in the room turned ice cold. What happened next would ignite a firestorm that the city of Blackwood would never forget. Her name was Lily Vance, and at 12 years old, she had just committed the ultimate act of betrayal against the only adult left in her life. She stood at the threshold of the grease-stained garage, her small frame silhouetted against the harsh afternoon sun, looking at the men in leather vests like they were monsters. But she knew the real monster was back at her house, and he didn't wear a patch. Before we continue, have you ever felt like you were in danger and no one believed you? Let us know in the comments below. Also, if you're new here, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us bring you more stories like this. And tell us, where are you watching from today? We love hearing from our global family. Now, let's get back to Lily's story. Kane, the mountain vein, was mid-weld on a custom chopper when he saw the shadow. He pushed his mask up, wiping soot from his brow, expecting a delivery or a prospect. Instead, he saw a kid. She was skinny, wearing a t-shirt 3 sizes too big, and clutching a backpack like a shield. In a town like Blackwood, kids knew to avoid the Skulls lot. It was common knowledge that the bikers were the unofficial law, a group you respected from a distance, but never approached unless you were looking for trouble. But Lily wasn't looking for trouble. She was looking for a miracle. "My brother," she repeated, her voice trembling so violently it was hard to make out the words. "He's still in the basement. He's been there for 2 days, and he stopped screaming. Please, you have to help him." Kane swapped a look with Silas, the club's sergeant-at-arms. The casual atmosphere of the shop vanished instantly. Kane stepped forward, his heavy boots echoing on the concrete. He didn't tower over her to intimidate. He knelt, bringing his massive frame down to her eye level. "Slow down, little bit," Kane said, his gravelly voice surprisingly gentle. "Who put your brother in the basement?" Lily's lower lip quivered, and the name that came out of her mouth made Kane's blood run cold. It wasn't a stranger. It was the man the town called a hero. The man was Marcus Thorne, Lily's stepfather and the decorated chief of police for Blackwood. To the public, Marcus was a pillar of the community, a man who had taken in 2 orphaned children after their mother's tragic accident a year ago. But behind the closed doors of the Colonial House on Elm Street, Marcus was a different creature entirely. He didn't use handcuffs for criminals. He used them on 10-year-old Leo. He didn't use his basement for storage. He used it as a sensory deprivation chamber to correct Leo's behavioral issues. Lily explained, through jagged sobs, that Leo had accidentally spilled juice on Marcus's uniform. The reaction had been instantaneous and silent, the scariest of Marcus's moods. He had dragged Leo by the hair toward the heavy wooden door in the kitchen. Lily had tried to intervene, but Marcus had simply looked at her with eyes like flint and told her that if she interfered, she would join him. For 48 hours, Lily had listened to her brother thumping against the door, then crying, and finally, a silence that was far more terrifying than the noise. Kane stood up, his jaw set, so tight his beard bristled. He looked at Silas and the 3 other patch members present. "Load up," was all he said. There was no debate. There was no call to the precinct, because the man they would be calling was the man they were going to hunt. The Iron Skulls operated on a simple code. They didn't hurt children, and they didn't tolerate those who did. As the engines of 6 Harleys roared to life, the sound wasn't just machinery, it was a warning. Lily climbed onto the back of Kane's bike, her small hands gripping the leather of his vest. She had spent a year being told that no one would believe her if she spoke. But as the wind whipped past her, she realized she hadn't just spoken, she had summoned a storm. The ride to Elm Street was a blur of suburban landscapes that looked peaceful but felt like a lie to Lily. When they pulled into the driveway, the neighborhood fell silent. People peeked through curtains, horrified to see the outlaw bikers at the chief's home. Kane didn't care about optics. He dismounted before the kickstand was even down. The front door was locked, But Silas didn't wait for a key. One well-placed kick with a steel-toed boot, and the frame splintered, the door swinging open to reveal a house that smelled of lemon polish and hidden secrets. "Marcus isn't here," Lily whispered, her eyes darting toward the stairs. "He's at the precinct. He said he'd be back by 6 to check on the progress." Kane didn't waste time on the upstairs. He followed Lily to the kitchen. In the corner, near the pantry, was a heavy door with a deadbolt that had been installed on the outside, an addition that definitely wasn't in the original blueprints. Kane felt a wave of nausea hit him. He had seen a lot of darkness in his life, but the calculated cruelty of a father locking a child away was a different level of evil. Silas produced a set of heavy-duty bolt cutters, but the deadbolt was high-grade steel. "Move," Kane barked. He took 2 steps back and slammed his shoulder into the wood. The house was old, the timber solid, but Kane was a force of nature. On the 3rd hit, the wood gave way with a sickening crack. The door swung open to reveal a staircase leading into a darkness so thick it felt tangible. The air that wafted up was cold and smelled of damp concrete and fear. Kane took the lead, his flashlight cutting through the gloom. At the bottom of the stairs, the basement was unfinished. In the far corner, inside what looked like a converted coal closet, they found him. Leo was curled into a ball on the freezing floor, his face pale and his breathing shallow. He didn't even flinch when the light hit him. He was too far gone into his own mind to realize help had arrived. When Kane picked the boy up, he realized Leo was feather-light, his skin clammy. "Get the kit," Kane roared at Silas. "He's dehydrated and in shock." As they brought Leo upstairs, Lily collapsed into a chair, her hand over her mouth. She watched as these rough, tattooed men worked with frantic precision to save her brother. They weren't just bikers anymore. They were the only family she had left. But the relief was short-lived. The sound of a car pulling into the gravel driveway sent a jolt of electricity through the room. The blue and red lights of a cruiser reflected off the kitchen windows. Marcus Thorne was home early. The front door creaked as Marcus Thorne stepped into his own home. He was a tall man, square-jawed, and wearing a crisp uniform that seemed to radiate authority. He didn't look like a villain. He looked like the man you'd trust with your life. But when he saw the splintered door and the bikers in his kitchen, his mask didn't just slip, it shattered. He didn't look at the sick boy on the table or his crying stepdaughter. He looked at Kane. "You've got exactly 5 seconds to get out of my house before I call every unit in the county," Marcus said, his hand resting on the holster at his hip. His voice was steady, the practiced tone of a man used to being obeyed. "You're trespassing on a peace officer's property. I'll have you all in central booking by midnight." Kane didn't move. He stood in front of Leo, a living wall of denim and muscle. "You're not calling anyone, Marcus," Kane said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "Because if you touch that radio, I'm going to show you exactly what it feels like to be trapped in a dark hole with no way out." Silas held up his phone. "We've got the basement on video, Chief. The lock on the outside. The kid's condition. You think your friends at the precinct are going to go down with you for this? Child abuse isn't a good look for a re-election campaign." Marcus's eyes narrowed. He was a smart man. He knew the Skulls had him cornered, but he also knew his power in this town. "It's my word against a bunch of outlaws," Marcus sneered. "I was disciplining a troubled child. The basement is a safe room. You're the ones who broke in. You're the ones who kidnapped him." The arrogance in his voice was the final straw. Kane took a step forward, and for the first time, Marcus looked genuinely afraid. The chief drew his weapon, but he was shaking. "Back off," he yelled. At that moment, Lily stood up. She walked between the two men, looking her stepfather directly in the eyes. "I'm not scared of you anymore," she said. "And neither is Leo." The distraction was all Kane needed. In a blur of movement, he disarmed the chief, the gun clattering across the linoleum. Kane didn't use a weapon. He used his hands, pinning the man against the wall with a grip that promised pain. "You're done, Marcus," Kane whispered. "In this town, the badge might protect you from the law, but it doesn't protect you from us." Outside, the roar of more motorcycles filled the air. The rest of the skulls had arrived, forming a perimeter. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a siege. But Marcus Thorne was a cornered rat, and rats always have a backup plan. He looked at the kitchen clock, a cruel smile touching his lips. You think I'm the only one involved? This town runs on my rules. You take me down, and the whole house of cards collapses. There are people in high places who need me quiet. As Kane prepared to drag the chief out, the sound of a heavy transport vehicle approached. It wasn't the police. It was a private security team, black SUVs with tinted windows. These were the men Marcus had on payroll for special projects. The standoff had just escalated from a kitchen brawl to an all-out war. Kane looked at Lily and the unconscious Leo. He knew they couldn't stay here, but leaving meant fighting through a mercenary line. Silas, get the kids to the clubhouse, Kane commanded. I'll hold them off. Lily grabbed Kane's hand. Don't leave us, she begged. Kane looked at her, his expression softening for just a fraction of a second. I'm not leaving you, kid. I'm just making sure you never have to look back. As the first flashbang shattered the living room window, Kane pushed the table over for cover. The heroes of Blackwood were coming for their secrets, and the Iron Skulls were the only things standing in the way of the truth being buried forever. Would you risk everything to save a child from a man who owns the city? The battle for the Vance children is just beginning, and the Iron Skulls are about to learn that some basements go deeper than they ever imagined. The flashbang explosion felt like the world had been ripped in half. White light blinded Kane, the mountain vein for a split second, followed by a high-pitched ringing that turned the screams in the kitchen into a silent, flickering movie. Smoke, thick and smelling of burnt magnesium and ancient dust, swirled through the air, obscuring the exits and making every breath a struggle. Kane didn't think. He reacted with the instinct of a man who had spent a lifetime in the trenches. He lunged through the haze, his massive arms wrapping around Lily and the unconscious, fragile form of Leo. He hauled them behind the heavy oak kitchen island, a solid barrier of wood and granite, just as a hail of submachine gun fire shredded the upper cabinets. Flour and splinters rained down on them like a grotesque winter snow, coating Kane's leather vest in white powder and mixing with the sweat on his brow. Silas, rear exit. Now, Kane roared, his voice barely audible over the ringing in his own ears. Silas, the club's sergeant-at-arms, was already moving. He grabbed Leo from Kane's arms, shielding the boy's limp body with his own bulk, his eyes scanning the smoke for the muzzle flashes of the intruders. Wren, the club's toughest road captain, grabbed Lily's hand. The girl was catatonic, her eyes fixed on the splintered doorway where the heroes of Blackwood were pouring in. These weren't the local patrolmen Lily had grown up seeing at the grocery store. These were men in matte black tactical gear, their faces hidden behind cold, ballistic masks that made them look like insects. They were Marcus Thorne's private cleaners, and they were here to make sure no one left the Elm Street house alive. To them, the Iron Skulls weren't a motorcycle club. They were just loose ends that needed to be tied off in the most violent way possible. Kane stood up, his hand closing around a heavy cast-iron skillet from the stove, a primitive but effective weapon in the hands of a giant. In his other hand, he held his sheer, terrifying willpower. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was a gatekeeper, a wall between a monster and his prey. As the first mercenary rounded the corner, Kane didn't wait for him to aim. He swung with the force of a wrecking ball, the heavy iron connecting with the man's helmet with a sickening, metallic crack. Before the second man could adjust his sight, Kane was on him, his weight bearing the shooter down into the shattered remains of the kitchen table. He could feel the cold rain blowing in through the broken windows, mixing with the heat of the fight and the copper tang of blood in the air. Outside, the neighborhood of Elm Street had turned into a tactical graveyard. The private security team had blocked both ends of the street with armored black SUVs, cutting off any hope of a standard retreat. They had transformed a quiet suburb into a kill zone. counting on the fact that no one would dare intervene against the chief of police. But they had underestimated one vital thing. The Iron Skulls didn't just have bikes. They had a brotherhood that spanned state lines. The roar of 50 more Harleys began to vibrate through the pavement, a low-frequency growl that felt like an approaching earthquake. It was the sound of the neighboring chapters arriving, a symphony of iron and thunder. The Order of the Watch might have had the money to buy mercenaries, but the Skulls had a loyalty that money couldn't touch, and that loyalty was about to burn the neighborhood down. In the backyard, Silas and Wren scrambled toward the dense tree line, carrying the children. The moon was a jagged sliver in the sky, offering little light to navigate the treacherous terrain of the garden. "We can't go to the bikes," Silas hissed, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts of steam. "They've got snipers on the SUV roofs. We have to take the ravine. It's the only blind spot they have." Lily stumbled, her small sneakers slipping on the damp, mossy grass. She looked back at the house, where flashes of gunfire lit up the kitchen windows like strobe lights at a haunted house. "Kane," she cried out, her voice a thin, desperate wail that was swallowed by the wind. "He's still in there. We can't leave him to face them alone." "Kane can handle himself, Lily," Silas grunted, though his eyes betrayed the jagged worry beneath his tough exterior. He knew the odds Kane was facing. His job is to draw the fire and keep their eyes on the house. Ours is to keep you two breathing. If Marcus gets his hands on you now, you won't just be going to the basement. You'll be going to the bottom of Blackwood Lake, and no one will ever find the truth. They slid down the muddy embankment into the ravine, the bone-chilling water of the creek soaking through their boots. Above them, the sounds of the neighborhood changed. The Skulls were no longer defending. They were launching a full-scale counterattack. The sound of heavy chains rattling and boots hitting the pavement echoed through the trees as the club moved in to reclaim the street. Back in the kitchen, Kane was pinned behind the island, the granite chipping away under the constant pressure of gunfire. He could hear Marcus Thorne's voice from the living room, calm, authoritative, and chillingly saying, "Give them up, Kane. You're an outlaw. I'm the chief of police. Who do you think the governor is going to believe when the smoke clears? I'll say you kidnapped those children, and I was the hero trying to rescue them. I'll have a medal by Monday, and you'll have a toe tag." Kane spat blood onto the tile, his eyes narrowing into slits of pure fury. "You talk too much, Marcus. That's always been your problem. You think a badge makes you a god. But out here, in the dark, you're just another man who's about to find out exactly how much a human soul weighs when it's stripped of its titles." Kane reached into his vest and pulled out a small, heavy device, a localized EMP jammer the club kept for technical emergencies. He thumbed the switch. Every light in the house died instantly. The hum of the refrigerator, the glowing lights of the oven, and the red lasers of the mercenaries' sights all vanished into a pitch-black void. In the absolute darkness, the advantage shifted. The mercenaries were reliant on their high-tech optics and night vision. Kane was reliant on the sharpened instincts of a man who had lived in the shadows his entire life. He moved like a ghost, guided by the sound of heavy breathing and the telltale scuff of tactical boots on linoleum. He found the first man near the refrigerator. A quick, silent strike to the throat, and the man was down before he could even process the shadow moving toward him. The second was by the pantry door. Kane didn't use a weapon. He used the man's own momentum, sending him headfirst into the doorframe with a dull, final thud. Marcus Thorne was the only one left in the room. Kane could hear the chief fumbling with a fresh magazine, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. The hero of Blackwood was finally feeling the cold grip of reality. He wasn't behind a desk or a podium anymore. He was in a cage with a mountain, and there were no cameras to protect him. "I know where the money is, Marcus," Kane whispered from the shadows, his voice appearing to come from everywhere at once, a psychological trick that made the chief spin in panicked circles. "I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know about the donations from the developers who wanted that low-income housing raised to build their luxury condos. You didn't just lock those kids up to hide your abuse. You did it because Leo saw you taking that briefcase in the study, didn't he? He saw the price of your soul, and you couldn't have that walking around. The silence that followed was the only confirmation Kane needed. The boy hadn't just spilled juice. He had witnessed a multi-million-dollar payoff that connected the chief to the city's largest corruption scandal in history. Suddenly, a flare ignited in the backyard, casting a ghostly green glow through the windows. The Iron Skulls had broken through the SUV line. Silas emerged from the ravine, having handed the kids off to his secondary transport team waiting in the deep woods. He stormed back into the house, his shotgun leveled. "It's over, Marcus," Silas yelled, his voice echoing through the hollowed-out home. The chief was slumped against the wall, his uniform torn, his face covered in the soot of the flashbang. He looked at his hands, then at the bikers. He realized the cleaners weren't coming back. The Iron Skulls had dismantled his private army in under 20 minutes, proving that a brotherhood built on trust is always stronger than a team built on a payroll. The drive to the Blackwood courthouse was a procession that the city would talk about for decades. Usually, the Iron Skulls avoided the courthouse like a plague, but tonight, they were the ones delivering the cargo. A convoy of nearly 100 motorcycles surrounded a single police cruiser, the one Kane had borrowed from Marcus's own driveway. Inside, Marcus sat in the back, handcuffed with his own department-issued steel. He wasn't arrogant anymore. He was a broken man, staring at the floorboards as the bikers revved their engines in a triumphant, deafening roar that woke up every resident in the city. They weren't just transporting a criminal, they were reclaiming their town. Kane didn't take him to the local jail, where Marcus still had friends and favors to call in. He took him straight to the steps of the federal building 3 towns over. He knew the local law was a spiderweb of corruption, but the feds had been looking for a reason to dig into Blackwood's books for years. Kane walked up the marble steps, Marcus in tow, and dumped the chief's own burner phone and a handwritten ledger found in the Elm Street safe onto the front desk. "We've got a special delivery," Kane told the stunned night clerk. Evidence of child abuse, high-level racketeering, and a chief of police who forgot that his job was to protect the innocent, not his own pocket. Start with the Project North entries. The fallout was an absolute landslide that buried the old guard of Blackwood. Within a week, 14 members of the Blackwood Police Department were under federal indictment. The developers involved in the housing scandal were arrested at the airport while trying to flee to non-extradition countries. The city's mayor resigned in disgrace. But the real victory, the one that mattered to Kane, was much quieter. It was found in a sunny room at a safe house 3 hours north. Lily and Leo were sitting on a porch, wrapped in clean, warm blankets. Leo was finally drinking water on his own, his eyes beginning to regain their spark of childhood curiosity. He looked up as the massive shadow of Kane walked up the stairs. "Are you the monsters?" Leo asked in a small, shaky voice, looking at the intricate tattoos on Kane's arms. Kane looked down at his hands, hands that had fought, hands that had broken doors, and hands that had carried a boy out of a dark basement. He knelt down, just like he had at the very beginning of this nightmare. "Some people think we are, kid," Kane said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "But we're the kind of monsters that keep the other ones away. You're safe now. You have our word, and an Iron Skull never breaks his word. You're part of our family now, and that means nobody ever touches you again." Leatherman. Months passed, and the city of Blackwood began to transform under the weight of the truth. The colonial house on Elm Street was sold at auction, with every cent of the proceeds going into a protected trust fund for the Vance children's future. Lily and Leo were eventually adopted by their mother's sister, a woman who had been desperately looking for them for a year, but had been blocked by Marcus's high-level legal maneuvers and fake restraining orders. They moved to a quiet town near the coast, where the sound of the ocean replaced the terrifying sound of thumping on basement doors. They finally had a yard where they could play without looking over their shoulders. But they never forgot the Leathermen who appeared when the world went dark. Every year, on the anniversary of the night Lily walked into that garage, a package would arrive at their new home. It wouldn't have a return address, just a postmark from Blackwood. Inside would be 2 new jackets, high-quality denim for Lily and a sturdy coat for Leo. They weren't club gear, but tucked inside the lining of each one, a small silver pin of a skull with iron wings was always hidden. It was a silent signal that no matter where they went, they were being watched over by the Mountain and his brothers. They weren't just orphans anymore. They were the wards of a brotherhood that spanned the country. Kane and the Iron Skulls went back to their garage. They were still outlaws in the eyes of the paperwork, but in the hearts of the people of Blackwood, they were the true protectors of the peace. Kane sat at his workbench one evening, looking at a photo Lily had sent him, a picture of Leo at his first school play, smiling broadly. Kane smiled back, a rare, genuine expression that softened his rugged features. He picked up his welding mask and lowered it, the blue spark of the torch lighting up the dark shop as he got back to work on a bike. He knew there would be other monsters, other basements, and other children who needed a voice in a world that often chose to stay silent out of fear. And as long as the Iron Skulls had fuel in their tanks and air in their lungs, those children would never have to face the darkness alone. Because at the end of the day, a basement is just a room until someone dares to break the door down. And Kane the Mountain Vane was very, very good at breaking doors. If this story reminded you that there's always hope in the dark, please subscribe and let us know which city you're watching from. You're part of this family now, and we're glad you're here. Until next time, stay safe and keep looking out for one another.